Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. I want to first mention that this is a current situation and it could happen again in the future, so I'm not 100% at ease with it yet. Well, I'm young, I'm 19 and male, and despite my age, people usually think that I'm around 15 or 16. A lot of times, I go to church at night, and to get there, I have to pass through a stretch where there aren't many people or traffic. It was in this place that at least twice, a man who I don't know approached me, offering me a ride on the motorcycle that he always rides. I'm saying every time and always, but it's only happened twice. But having it happen once and then a second time made me more worried. It makes me feel like I'm being followed or that he knows exactly where and when I pass by alone. The first time I saw him, I was walking down the street and he came by on his motorcycle. I thought he was asking for directions, so I tried to listen to see what it was, but as I got closer, I realized that he was only looking down at me and not at my face. So I made up an excuse and I kept walking. I was lucky because he didn't follow me or insist. The second time that I was heading to church, he was already on that same street. This happened weeks or months after the first encounter. Again, he tried to get my attention, but I was walking on the other side of the street and I pretended to not notice him. I was really worried and scared at that point because I saw that it was happening again, so I kept walking straight. I could already see the church, but he came by on his motorcycle, stopped right by the edge of the road, got off, and came up to me offering a ride. And by chance, there weren't any cars passing by, so I crossed the road. You have to cross a road that connects cities to get to my church, and many cars pass through it. That day, there was a celebration with a lot of people, and I stayed the rest of the night talking with friends from there, out of fear that this man would enter or do something. Fortunately, I got a ride back in a car, and I wasn't alone. My biggest fear is that this could happen a third time, since now, he knows where I'm going to. Some time ago, I told my husband that I was heading to the store. I just needed to grab some last-minute supplies for the dinner that we were hosting that night. Our closest friends, Mike and Grace, were moving across the country for a new job opportunity. It was a bittersweet farewell, and we wanted to send them off with a proper meal and an evening filled with laughter and memories. We had been through so much together, from celebrating their kids' birthdays to sharing countless holiday dinners. Their move was a big change for us, but we understood that the opportunity was too good for them to pass up. So I wanted everything to be perfect for their send-off. I drove to the local shopping center. It was a small place not far from our house. It was a weekday afternoon, so I wasn't surprised to find the parking lot sparsely populated. There were just a few cars dotted with wide expanse of asphalt, leaving plenty of space to park wherever you wanted to. Inside, the store was calm and quiet. There weren't many people shopping, which was nice because it made it easy to move through the aisles and focus on my list. I grabbed a cart, I started picking up items that we needed, some fresh vegetables, a nice cut of meat, and a couple bottles of wine. As I moved from aisle to aisle, I felt a subtle sensation that I was not alone. I then noticed a man who seemed to appear in every section that I visited. He was average looking, wearing a plain jacket and jeans, nothing remarkable or nothing that made him suspicious or creepy. And at first, I really thought that it was just a coincidence. I mean, we were shopping after all. But as I moved to the dairy section, there he was again, seemingly focused on the same area. I tried to brush off the feeling, telling myself that it was just paranoia or the eeriness of the near empty store. But when it happened again in the frozen food section, I couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in my stomach. I decided to test my suspicion by taking a detour to a part of the store that I didn't need anything from, the aisle with cleaning supplies. And sure enough, moments later, he appeared there, pretending to browse products on the shelves. It was just weird. He didn't look at me, he didn't say anything to me, but he was just there wherever I went to. My heart started to race, the realization setting in that this wasn't mere chance. I kept my head down though, pretending to look at my list, trying not to let him see that I was aware of his presence. I then quickly pushed my cart towards the checkout area, hoping that the cashier would deter him. As I unloaded my items onto the conveyor belt, I glanced back and saw him standing a few aisles away, partially hidden behind a display stand. And this time, his eyes were fixed on me. I could barely concentrate as the cashier rang up my items. My thoughts were scattered. There was a mix of fear and disbelief, and once my groceries were bagged, I moved quickly towards the exit. I wanted to go home, but something inside me told me not to exit the store alone. I did not feel safe knowing that this guy was following me around. What if he was outside waiting for me to get into my car and then jump out? Or what if he followed me home? The store didn't have a security guard, and the only worker that I could see was the young and petite female cashier. So I decided to do the only thing that I could think of, to contact my husband. My hands were trembling as I reached for my phone. I texted my husband, telling him about the strange man who seemed to be following me in the store. I asked him to come over, needing his presence. I waited near the store entrance, trying to act casually, but my heart was pounding whenever I saw a shadow or hear footsteps approaching. 10 minutes passed, though it did feel much longer. I saw my husband parking, and then he walked towards me. Relief just washed over me. He approached with a calm demeanor, but his eyes showed that he understood the situation. And funny enough, at the exact moment, I saw the man in the corner. Looked like he just popped out of nowhere. And as soon as the man who had been following me noticed, he turned around and left, quickly disappearing out into the trees behind the store. I stayed close to my husband as we walked back to the car. I was looking around to make sure that the man was truly gone. I then got in my car and I drove, and my husband drove his, following me out of the store. The whole experience left me shaking inside. I did call the non-emergency hotline to report the incident, so if something happens to someone else, at least they already have an idea that there's a suspicious man going around that area. We never did see that man again, and I am grateful for that. But the sense of security that I once felt while shopping alone was altered. It was a day that reinforced the importance of staying alert and trusting your instincts. And you bet that after that incident, I never went to that store without my husband. Hello, I'm a 20-year-old female, and I have a stalker who is 20 to 21 and male. This started about 2 to 3 months ago. I work in an art store and I do a little of everything, helping customers, cleaning, stocking shelves, and many more. One day, this guy comes in asking for help as he never really took up art before. And lucky me, I was chosen to help that guy. We talked for a bit and I asked what he wants to learn, what medium he wants to use and such. He said that he's into sketching at the moment, but he wants to expand his horizon. I say cool, and I give him a few directions. And somehow, it comes up that I'm also an artist. And he then gets really interested. He asked me if I can help him with art, which caught me off guard because, huh? I said that I'm not a professional and I'm not interested in teaching. But he took that well, and off he went. The next week he returns again and specifically asked for me. He said that he brought his sketchbook this time, which I found very odd since I don't remember agreeing to help him. He shows me some of his sketches, and I noticed that he only draws K-pop singers, and I realized that one of them is a member of BTS. I don't really listen to them, but I just pointed it out. He then starts raving about BTS and K-pop and the like, which is like, okay? Apparently, I hit a sweet spot for him because nobody likes K-pop and I know of it. Anyway, he starts coming in now every few days and I'm really disturbed by him. I also found out that he learned my work schedule, my birthday, my name, how old I am, and many more. I only found this out because of a few encounters with a said customer. Number 1. One day, I clock into work and I see him waiting in the stairs for me. He then acts all surprised like, "Whoa, I didn't know you were coming in so early." And I could tell that he's lying because he was sweating really badly and couldn't look at my face, and it creeped me out so much. Number 2. On my birthday, he came up to me at the exact time that I'm supposed to start my shift, and he gave me a gift and a note. He drew a member of a band that I like and gave me a birthday card, and told me that he wanted to bring me something a day before my birthday because he knew that I wouldn't come in the day of. Mind you, I never told him my birthday. He probably overheard me talking about it to my coworkers, but it creeped me out so much. I had insane amounts of anxiety and I had to muster up the courage to act like I wasn't completely off-put by this. After he walked away, I looked at the note that he wrote me, which said, "Happy 20th birthday. Keep making people happy and being so kind. P.S. I'm not a paper thief, so you can have this back." Huh? Paper thief? And then I realized that the paper the note was written on was a piece of garbage that I threw away months ago. He picked it up from the trash to return to me. That made my blood run cold. Number 3. He came in and asked for help like usual when he brought up buying something for kids. And because I wanted to know if maybe there's a wife or something involved, I asked, "Oh, how old are your kids?" Obviously, I also need to know to give him age-appropriate supplies. He then started freaking out and saying that those weren't his kids and that he's not married. And then started asking me if I'm married. I said that I'm not married, but I am in a committed relationship and have been for 5 years now. Which was a lie, but he got very disappointed. He then walked off, and I thought maybe that was it. He didn't come in for 2 weeks and I was overjoyed up until today. He came up to me during work while I was busy and asked for help, and then asked where I was for 2 weeks, which really confused me, but also disturbed me deeply. I tried my best to not interact with him, and I told my coworker to take over for a while I go hide in the back. She agrees and keeps him busy, and then he just ends up leaving. After he left, she called me over and said that I can come out, and I asked, "Did he ask anything about me?" And she looked at me with a concerned look and said, "Yeah, he did. He asked why you're so busy suddenly, and when you'll come out and if you work tomorrow. I am riddled with anxiety, and it's making me really anxious at work because I'm afraid to see him. Thankfully, he hasn't done anything physical to me, but it's putting a lot of mental strain on me, and I don't want to quit because I love my job and my co-workers. Also, very important to mention, after the birthday incident, the moment that he left, I went up to management and told them everything about him, and that it creeps me out and I feel really unsafe. My manager said, "Well, it's totally legitimate to go after a girl you like. That's what men would do back in the day. You should feel flattered." And the co-owner said, "It's all because women wear little clothes nowadays. It makes the men act up." And just to note, I have to conform to dress code, and I haven't even showed as much as a shoulder. I told my parents and friends, and they are all on my side and think that he's a complete weirdo. Honestly, I don't know what to do about it. It's really creepy, and I'm scared to encounter him again. I, a 30-year-old female, went to a concert last night with a group of friends. Towards the end of the concert, I noticed the men appearing near me every time that I went to a different area of the venue. I may have said a couple words in passing, but we didn't exchange names or anything. After the concert, I was talking to my friends and one of their family members when I noticed this man was there next to us again. When we left the venue to walk my friend's mom to her car, I told my friends about the strange man and that I thought that he was following me inside the venue. I said this pretty loudly, and I decided to turn around to see if anyone heard. He was right there, about 3 paces behind us. I immediately told my friends that he was there, and my BFF was like, "Is it you?" and essentially told him to get lost. I'm still feeling really weird about the whole encounter. What would have happened if I had been alone? Edit. I am not asking for advice. I plan to bring a taser next time that I go out, and I will look into purchasing a small firearm in 2025. Women shouldn't have to protect ourselves from creeps. How about people just stop being creeps? One of my friends just reminded me of this story, so I figured that I would post it here. This happened towards the beginning of our freshman year in college. My best friend, another freshman girl my age, and I befriended this other freshman guy, and we quickly became a tight-knit group. We would hang out with each other constantly, to the point that some assumed that we were siblings or roommates. At the beginning of our first semester, one of us were really into the whole party scene, so we spent most of our time wandering around campus into the late hours of the night. I'm talking 4 to 5 a.m. some nights. We had lots of fun adventures and made all sorts of fun memories doing this. But we had our fair share of weird encounters, both with other people and some that we cannot explain to this day. This story happened not on the weekend, but I believe on a weekday close to midterms. I remember us all studying in one of the academic buildings together late at night. And then one of us mentioned wanting to take a long walk around campus just to help relieve the stress. It was around 2 or 3 a.m. at that time, and we decided to hike out to one of the scenic overlooks on our campus. Our campus was pretty rural, and it was surrounded by woods, so there was a path through the woods that you could take or you could just walk on the main road. We decided to follow the road. It was really dark, and this particular area of the campus had very few streetlights. We were using our phone flashlights to see where we were going. It was probably not the best idea to be roaming around campus so late at night, but we were stupid freshmen and had done it plenty of times before. Our campus felt safer due to it being so rural. We made it to the overlook, and we were the only ones out there due to how late it was. No cars were parked or anything. The way it's set up is that the road goes into the circle around the overlook. We were sitting on a bench with our backs to the main road, just talking about random things, when all of a sudden, we felt headlights on our backs, so we all turned to see who it was. It wasn't entirely unusual for a car to be out there late at night. Our campus police do regular patrols of the area, or students will go there to hook up or use drugs. The car was an older GMC Yukon-style SUV and was a dark forest green color. I vividly remember the color because you typically don't see many cars that color, you know? We all watched as the car came in from the road, drove around the little circle, and then went back up the road. We just went back to our conversation, but 2 to 3 minutes later, we could see the headlights behind us again. We again turned to look and realized that it was the same green car as before, coming back a second time. We didn't think much of it, but I could tell that my friends were slightly weirded out about it. Again, the car approached from the road behind us and then went around the loop, but was driving much slower this time. They kind of stopped midway through the circle for a few seconds before slowly driving away again. But it isn't that unusual for cars to go slow around that circle portion, especially if they are tourists or someone wanting to enjoy the view of the lookout. So we again didn't think much of it and figured that they came back a second time just to enjoy the sights again, although it probably wasn't much of a sight given how dark it was. We again tried to carry on with our conversation, but I think all of us felt a little uneasy now. I almost wasn't surprised when about another 2 to 3 minutes later, we saw headlights approaching from behind us again. We all turned around hoping that it wouldn't be the same car, but of course, it was. We were each pretty scared now, but I think we were all trying to laugh it off, and we were like, they must love it here. This time, they once again slowed way down going around the circle and rolled their windows down to yell at us. We were sat far enough back from the circle and it was a windy night, so we couldn't really make out what it was that they were yelling, but we all agreed that we heard, "Gonna get you" towards the end. We also couldn't see well enough to recognize faces, but could see enough to know that it was a car full of younger men. We were all pretty uneasy and confused at this point, and after they drive off, we frantically are trying to figure out how to handle the situation. We first were trying to brush it off and calm each other down by saying that it was probably some of our mutual friends just trying to scare us. But none of us recognized the car or the voices enough to say that that was for sure the case. We all considered walking back since it was late anyway, but we were all so scared that we would just run into this car again on the main road. My best friend and I tried to laugh it off, agreeing there was simply no way that it would drive by a fourth time, and that we were probably making a big deal out of nothing. But my male friend who was with us kept telling us that he just didn't have a good feeling about it, and said that if the car came by again, he would try to take photos of its license plate and then call the campus police. We eventually agreed with him, figuring the car likely wouldn't come by again. After 5 minutes and no sign of the car, we all relaxed and continued carrying on. But of course, we were wrong. We all sat in silence as the headlights approached for the fourth time, Neither of us really wanted to say anything or look behind us to confirm that it was the same dark green car. As the car rounds the circle, our male friend stands up with his phone in hand in an attempt to take a picture of the license plate. This time, instead of completing the circle and going back up the road, the car suddenly pulls into a parking spot off to the side. My friends and I are all panicking, assuming the worst is about to happen. We were all waiting for someone to step out of the car or for the car to leave, when our male friend suddenly gets up and is like, this is fucking ridiculous. I'm going to talk to them. My other friend and I are begging him not to, since we don't know who these people are or what they are capable of. But he brushes us off and starts walking towards them. At this point, I think he was still assuming that it was likely a friend or a fellow student just trying to scare us and not some randos. My friend and I are freaking out as we watch them approach this car, and whoever is driving rolls the window down and sticks their head out. It was definitely not someone we knew. It was a guy, probably a few years older than us, who looked rough. Absolutely not the person that you would want to run into at 3 a.m. in the woods. My friend and I watched this guy and our friend start talking, and to us, it looked like the guy in the car was really angry. We were debating whether or not we should go ahead and call the police, but as soon as my friend managed to dig her phone from her bag, our friend was walking back towards us, and the green car was leaving. We all looked at him like, "What the fuck, man?" And he explained that the car was filled with creepy-looking guys a little older than us. The driver had explained that they were from out of town, a city about an hour away from us, and had gotten bored, so they decided to drive around campus to mess with the students when they came across us. One of the passengers had seen my friend get up to take what he correctly assumed was a photo of their license plate, so they then freaked out and then decided to pull over and tell us that they meant no harm since they didn't want to get in trouble. They apologized to my friend for scaring us and explained that they would leave. My friend was so scared while talking to them that all he could really say was, yeah, maybe don't do that again because we almost called the police." We all calmed down significantly after they left and eventually felt safe enough to leave. From what I remember, I think we ended up getting lucky and were able to find another friend who also happened to be awake late that night who came to drive us back so we wouldn't have to walk. We all laughed about the situation now since ultimately nothing bad had happened, but it still gives me the creeps. What would have happened if my friend hadn't tried to take a picture of their license plate? Were they planning something else that we prevented? Why was this group of random men who lived over an hour away randomly driving around a rural college campus on a random weeknight? It hit me a few days after this all happened, but I realized that I had seen that car before. Earlier in the day when this all happened, I had spotted the same exact car a few times around campus. It drove past me as I was walking to my morning class, again when I was coming out of the library later in the afternoon, and again at the dining hall in the early evening. I made note of it the first time I saw it since it was such a uniquely colored car and also happens to be one of my favorite colors. As I kept seeing it, I remember thinking, I have a stalker. But I did not take it seriously at that time since it's a smaller campus that has a lot of traffic that time of year. So I figured that it was just a tourist and a coincidence that I kept seeing the car. But now, I really wonder, were they following me the whole day? Had the car been around before this, and I just never noticed it? What do you guys think? My name is Haley, and I work in a downtown office building, and I'm buried in paperwork and numbers as an accountant. Most days, I clock out at a reasonable hour, but today was different. A few unexpected projects landed on my desk, and before I knew it, the city outside my window had turned dark. My phone had buzzed earlier with messages from friends making evening plans since it was a Friday, but work kept me tied to my desk. By the time that I left, the streets were extremely quiet, with only the occasional late worker like me heading home. I usually carpool with a colleague, but she had left early for a family emergency, and I didn't want to bother anyone, so I decided to take the bus home, something that I rarely did after dark. The bus stop was just a block away from the office. It was a small, lonely structure under a flickering streetlight. The route was very straightforward, but the stop itself was not exactly welcoming. It sat at the corner of two quiet streets, bordered by a tall, shadowy building that seemed to loom over you. The only sounds were the wind rustling through the narrow alleyways and the distant hum of traffic from the main road. As I approached the stop, I noticed someone already waiting there. A man. He was standing in the shadows, partially obscured by the dim light. He wore a dark hoodie, and the hood pulled low over his face. He had jeans that had seen better days, and his posture was relaxed, but something about it felt off, like he was too comfortable in this eerie setup. I just gave a polite nod and I kept my distance, standing a few feet away from him. My eyes wandered around hoping to spot the familiar lights of the bus, but the street remained as empty as before. The man seemed to shift closer though, not much, but enough for me to notice. I checked my phone, pretending to be engrossed in something important, though the screen was just lit up with a homepage. A few minutes felt like an eternity, each tick of the clock echoing in the silence, and I could feel his eyes on me. It was just a weight that was impossible to ignore. I glanced in his direction, and he flashed a grin that was more unsettling than friendly. I turned away, trying to focus on the street again, determined not to make eye contact with the sky. And finally, the bus appeared. I got in, and I chose a seat midway down the aisle. But to my dismay, the man followed, sitting directly across from me. The bus was nearly empty, with just a few passengers scattered here and there, and his presence felt too close, too deliberate. During the ride, I kept my gaze fixed out the window, just watching the lights outside. But I could see his reflection in the glass. He tapped his foot a lot and occasionally leaned forward, as if trying to catch my eye. The space between us felt charged with a tension that set my nerves on edge. When we finally reached my stop, I stood up, hoping that he would stay put. But as I stepped off the bus, he followed. He was maintaining a steady pace behind me. The street was familiar to me, of course, but his presence turned it into an unfamiliar territory. I was feeling discomfort and I couldn't shake it off. I took deep breaths, walking with purpose, trying to convince myself that it was just a coincidence. But his footsteps echoed mine, mirroring my every move. I knew better than to head directly home, so I decided to cut through a small plaza, hoping to lose him in the tangle of paths and benches. He hesitated at the edge of the plaza as I took a convoluted path. I was weaving between trees and benches. It was an impromptu detour that thankfully seemed to confuse him. I glanced back once, and I saw him standing at the entrance, casting a shadow that seemed to stretch towards me. With the thudding of my heart in my ears, I slipped out the other side, heading to a nearby convenience store. The bright lights and the presence of other people grounded me, pulling me out of the spiral of anxiety that I was feeling. I stayed there for a while, just pretending to browse the aisles until I was sure that he hadn't followed me. And when I was sure, I walked home. When I finally made it home, I was relieved immensely. I locked the door behind me, and that little click sound when you lock the door seemed to be the most comforting thing at that moment. And I just continued with my night. I don't know why I didn't call the police or told anyone. I just decided to myself that I am never going home that late ever again. So I was 19, and I had been with my current fiancé and at that time boyfriend for a year. We both work at the same chemical manufacturing company. I was the night shift lead on my team, and we had hired this guy who I will call Gabe. Gabe was somewhere around late 50s, early 60s, and I had to interact with him as the shift lead and trainer pretty much no matter what. And at night, there was pretty much no one else besides my fiancé's team on the other side of the building and my team present after 2 p.m. So I was pretty much entirely in charge of my team and everything that had to get done. And this is for context and why my ability to avoid him was extremely limited. Anyway, Gabe started talking to me about his type and preferences in women. I didn't see how this was relevant to me and made it clear that I didn't care what his preferences were and accept that everyone had their own. I didn't want to make a big deal out of a seemingly small topic at that time. But he then proceeded to share his ideologies with me, and I remained aloof about the whole subject. It was along the lines of, "It's fine if women work temporarily, but eventually, the goal is to settle down and have children. After all, it works better to have someone working to pay the bills and someone else to manage all the household work." I am quite aware that this is a life people are comfortable with, and I respect it, as I also respect other religions even if I do not follow them. I do not personally agree that the household requires someone to stay home to manage it all the time, nor do I think that if someone does that it has to be the woman. But as far as these conversations went, I didn't see any connection between them and me, and mostly, I just let him prattle whatever he wants to get off his chest, as it wasn't my business. I am not a traditional woman, and figured if anything, I was the opposite of this description anyways. He and I did get into a heated argument once about America's economy and how it's so much better here because everyone can be rich, which I try to explain how it is impossible for everyone to be rich in an economy. Well, the story moves on, and my fiancé was let go for health reasons, and he had to go on unemployment. We only shared one vehicle, and I only had my driver's permit at that time, so I wasn't comfortable driving alone back home at 1 a.m. So I gave my boss a 3 weeks notice just to ensure that I could train everyone up to speed so they weren't screwed over in my absence, which is a notion that my boss very much appreciated. I told the team, and that's when Gabe started behaving in a disagreeable manner. In week 1, I had a hickey on my neck. My boss knew and never made any complaint or fight against it. This wasn't overly common, it's just sometimes happened. But considering that we didn't deal with customers, he certainly didn't care about it. But Gabe did. While I was working, he tapped my shoulder and I assumed that he had some kind of question for me, so I paused to listen, only for him to address my hickey. "Don't you think it's a little unprofessional?" To which I replied that we do not need to put on a show for anyone, and it doesn't hinder my ability to work in any fashion. Well, what if it bothers people or our boss that you're parading your personal life like that? I said that if my boss told me that it was unacceptable, I would take the extra effort to ensure that it didn't happen again. But considering how no one has said anything to me before, I assume that they do not care, so neither will I. So, you don't care if it hurts someone's feelings? No, I do not really, because their feelings about my life are not my concern. Anything they think about it is only their own assumption of what happened anyways, making it their own imagination. Now, I also thought the last response was a weird one anyway. There's no reason my hickey should hurt someone's feelings at work. Questioning my professionalism is a separate issue entirely. But it didn't matter as Gabe walked away. Then while we were all at lunch, Gabe was sitting across from me at the table, and I was talking with the person next in line to be the lead, when I noticed Gabe was holding his phone up at a weird angle. I didn't want to make an accusation when I couldn't be 100% certain, but my instincts told me that he took a picture of me at work. However, this will be later confirmed. On my last week, I had been officially fed up with Gabe, and I had trained the girl after me to everything that I knew as a lead, and I told her that she will be calling all the shots on my last week, and I will simply be here for support if she needs it. I also informed her privately that I will especially not be conducting any verbal interaction with Gabe as I no longer needed to, and I would appreciate it if she took charge on that which she agreed. Unfortunately, Gabe took a stand on this, ultimately forcing a conversation with me in his last week. I just don't think I can take orders from a woman. She can't be my boss. I told him that I had been his boss previously and that the boss above my boss was also a woman. He simply refused to accept it. I then told him that it didn't matter how he felt because I was leaving and she would be in charge, so he could accept that or quit, and it didn't matter to me. I also told him then that I would no longer answer his questions and he would have to go to her. Fate had it out for me though, because on my last day, she had an emergency and needed to leave early, and with us already down another person, it was just me and Gabe that night, much to my displeasure. Again, left with having to direct him around, which he clearly had no issue when it was me. As we were leaving, he stops me on my way out and asks a question that glued all the pieces together. I know your boyfriend is unemployed now, so how would you feel if someone asked if you left your boyfriend for someone who could provide you with a house, a car, and everything that you needed? This made me lose it momentarily for two reasons. One, I love my fiancé very much, and now currently we are going on 6 years together. And second, I have always worked hard for everything I have with my own two hands, and I take major offense to being treated like some desperate damsel in distress who would be with someone over the concept of money. I am not shallow, nor am I materialistic. So I answered pretty honestly, and I told him that I'd be extremely offended because that's not the kind of person I am, and to assume so would indicate such a lack of knowledge about me and insult my character. And then I left, ready to never see him again or talk to him again. It was clear in the end that from the very beginning, he was approaching me with romantic intentions, and gross as it all was, the age gap disgusted me as well. I was 40 years younger than this man. I still had contact with the girl who took my place, and she told me after I had left, he was telling people that me and him were in love, and I was gonna leave my now fiancé for him, and he was showing people the picture he took of me. So glad that that was confirmed. 3 months later, he texted me with a "hey" and a smiley face, because as his boss, I gave my number to employees to let me know if they couldn't come in for work. I told him to never contact me again and that I only spoke to him because I was the lead and I needed to be in contact with others, and there was no reason to speak to each other anymore. Then I changed my number to ensure that he never could again. I was about 14 back then. I had skipped school and I decided to go to a mall. This mall was known to have creepy teenagers or men who stalk and hit on girls, and I've had some small experiences there before. But it was 8 a.m. and I didn't think anyone could do that in broad daylight. Well, they did. And since then, I haven't been back to that mall alone. I got off the bus and I went to the entrance that had a little playground in front of it. I thought that it would be safer if there were kids or families around. I sat on a swing and I pulled out my phone to pass some time until I could get back home. There was an old lady with her granddaughter on the kids slide near me, and I for sure felt safe being near them. After about 5 minutes of me scrolling on my phone, I heard the voices and screams of teenage boys. I looked up, and in a few seconds, they were running around and causing a commotion everywhere. And at that moment is when I started to not feel safe anymore because I knew to expect the worst. I knew them. The town and the city knew them. They were not nice people, even though they were teenagers a little older than me. I stood up to go inside because they started looking at me and sneakily going near me. I thought there would be a big crowd enough inside the mall for them not to follow me around and potentially do something. I went in a store inside the mall to buy myself something and take my mind off the situation. I didn't hear or see them on the walk to the store or on the walk back, where I sat on a couch that they had inside the mall. I really thought that I lost them. But I still didn't let myself feel safe enough though, not until I was out of there. A minute or two later, I was again scrolling on my phone when I saw them. This time, I didn't wait around. I stood up and I walked to the bathroom, which had a huge hall before you reach it. I noticed them following me and I walked faster. And when I reached the girls' bathroom, I went in one of the stalls and I stayed there for a full 30 to 40 minutes just on my phone until I thought that it has been long enough for them to give up and then leave. I exited the stall and I started washing my hands when I saw them. 6 boys peeking inside the girls' bathroom, which had no door, looking right at me and joking around with each other. A couple of them were close enough to be considered basically fully inside the bathroom, and I remember hearing one of them saying, "Yeah, I think it's her," or something like that to the other. That's when, while still washing my hands, I was frantically coming up with a plan. Do I just risk it and walk out? Do I call someone to get me? Do I ask someone to walk out with me? I went with the third option, and I looked around and there were maybe around 3 to 4 women there. The closest one to me was around 40 years old, and she was drying her hands. I had a fight with myself if I should ask her to walk out with me. And I decided to do it because I basically had no other safe option. I was shaking at this point, building up the courage to speak, and then I did. "Excuse me, I'm sorry. Can I walk out with you? There's this group of boys who have been following me around almost all morning, and they're waiting outside for me." There was a pause. Thoughts flooded my mind. I shouldn't have asked. She must think that I'm insane. But then she agreed, and we walked out. I didn't even glance at the direction of the boys. The woman's husband was waiting outside of the bathroom for her, Seeing him made me super relieved because now the boys would be hesitant to follow me and the woman because there was a man with us. She explained the situation to her husband. I could see that he didn't fully believe or understand the situation, but he ended up agreeing to walk out with me and his wife out of the long hallway to the exit. And while walking, I briefly explained how the boys had been following me, and they seemed to understand. When the end of the long hallway came, they went their way into a store, and I went off to the exit as fast as I could. When I passed the security guard, I felt safer, but not as safe as when I got out of that mall. When I was outside, I finally got some fresh air and I realized how panicked I was. I ran to the closest bus stop that was far enough from the mall, if that makes sense, and I came home early that day and didn't even care if anyone found out that I skipped school. I have been avoiding that mall as much as I can since then. I don't want to think about what would have happened if I were to walk out alone that day, or if I weren't so focused on my surroundings. To the woman and her husband who walked out with me, thank you. My name is Fred, and I played in a small local band. We were nothing big, just a group of friends who jammed together and occasionally played gigs at bars and even local events around the town in the 1980s. Music has always been my escape, a way to express what words cannot, and I play the guitar, and my bandmates say that I've got a knack for it. The band came into existence somewhat organically. It started with Mike, our drummer, who I met through a mutual friend. We clicked instantly over our shared love for old rock bands. And then there's Jenny, our bassist, who joined after we heard her play at an event one night. Her skills were undeniable, and she brought a new groove to our sound. And lastly, we had Jesus on the vocals. He's got this raw, powerful voice that commands attention and has always been the face of our band. We don't play for fame or money, but for us, it's about the joy of making music together, feeling that rush when a song comes together perfectly. We usually practice in Mike's garage, surrounded by old posters and instruments that we've picked up over the years. It's comfortable, it's a creative space where our ideas flow as easily as the music. Our biggest audience is usually made up of familiar faces, our friends, our family, and some locals who enjoy our sound. We don't expect much more than that, really. So, when we started seeing a new face at every gig, it caught my attention. She was always there, front row, watching intently. At first, I thought she was just another music lover, but there was something about her. I'm not saying that in an I'm in love kind of way. It was a I'm feeling uncomfortable kind of way. She stood out not just because she was always there, but because she had this intensity in her eyes. It was as if she was trying to memorize every chord, every lyric. I'd see her mouthing the words to our songs, and it was flattering at first. I mean, who wouldn't want a dedicated fan, right? But soon, it began to feel more personal. Our band started gaining a bit more attention locally, thanks to some decent write-ups in the town blogs. And that's when she started appearing off stage too. After our gigs, while packing up our gear, I would spot her hanging back, waiting near the exit or outside the venue. Once or twice, she tried to approach, but with the noise and bustle, it was easy to slip away unnoticed. Despite the growing crowd, her presence became something that I just couldn't ignore. She started showing up at places where I wouldn't expect. I'd see her at my favorite coffee shop, sitting a few tables away, or at a park where I sometimes went to clear my mind. She never approached me. She just watched from afar with that same intense gaze. I brushed it off at first, convinced that I was imagining things or being paranoid. After all, it was a small town and paths were bound to cross. But when she started to appear outside our band practice sessions, any semblance of coincidence vanished. We would wrap up a late night session only to find her standing across the street, partially hidden in the shadows, watching us pack up. It was unsettling, this constant feeling of being observed, so I talked to the band about it, but they laughed it off. To them, it was just a harmless fan, maybe a bit over-enthusiastic, but definitely not a threat. Jesus even joked that it was good for our image to have real fans. But something about it just didn't sit right with me. I tried to ignore it, hoping that she would lose interest and move on. But instead, things escalated. I started receiving anonymous notes left under the windshield wipers of my car or slipped into my guitar case when I wasn't looking. They were meticulously handwritten, filled with detailed descriptions of our performances and personal comments that felt too intimate, too informed. The notes made it clear that she knew more about me than a casual fan should. Little things about my life that were never shared publicly. It was as if she had peeled back layers to see things meant only for me. I became hyper aware of my surroundings, looking over my shoulder more often than before. The joy that I found in playing in front of a lot of people started slipping away, replaced by anxiety and discomfort. One night, after a particularly draining gig, I found myself alone picking up my guitar in the empty venue. The others had left already. I was a bit late since I had to battle with nature in the toilet. I'm sorry for that. Well, as I turned to leave, there she was, standing directly in the doorway. Her presence in the dim light felt almost surreal. My heart pounded as I forced myself to stay calm. I was pretending to check my phone as I moved towards the exit. She didn't say a word. She just watched with those intense eyes that haunted me for weeks. I slipped past her, out into the cool night air, hoping that the darkness would swallow me up before she could follow. This encounter really creeped me out, so I reached out to a friend of mine who was working in law enforcement, and I explained the whole thing. He took it seriously, which was great. He then offered some advice on how to document everything and stay safe, saying that they really couldn't do anything if I didn't have definitive proof. From that point, I took precautions. I was always making sure that I wasn't alone when leaving gigs or practices. I informed the band again, who finally understood the seriousness of the situation. They offered their support, making sure that someone was always with me, especially when going home late at night. But funny enough, after everyone and even myself was taking this more seriously, the sightings became less frequent, as if she sensed the shift that I was documenting stuff and observing her more seriously. Playing with my band is still one of my greatest joys in life, but it's different. I'm more cautious, more aware of how exposed we are on stage, even in our small town bubble. It's a strange balance, finding comfort in the spotlight while knowing what lurks just beyond. But it taught me the value of boundaries. Anyway, I just wanted to share this creepy old story of mine. I was compelled to right after joining Reddit and then discovering this sub. So yeah, stay safe everyone, and rock on. So, this story was from years back. To start, It was me, a 13-year-old female, and my best friend, who was also 13 and female. I was a bit sheltered as a kid, and I was never allowed to walk around and explore outside the house. My mom was worried about weirdos and accidents, and I always thought that she was paranoid, till this day. It was around 5 p.m. and getting dimmer, and I convinced my best friend to go on a walk with me to this abandoned train just a couple blocks down. We would hang out there and annoy our friend who lives right next door to the abandoned tracks. We had walked out our house and barely made it a few doors down when we saw this yellowish beige car slowly pull up towards us. They stopped dead center in the middle of the road, and the car was basically a fishbowl, and we could see what looked to be 5 men cramped in it. They were all smiling, not even a friendly, excusable smile, but one of pure derangement and craze. 3 of them proceeded to get out of the car and stand there smiling at us like they were about to charge us. If I'm not misremembering, I think they also had popped their back trunk. I can't forget the face of the man closest to us. He was the creepiest. His smiling was menacing, and he was breathing heavy out of excitement. My best friend ran down the block immediately, and I followed after her. She turned the corner into the midsection between her neighborhood and the one behind. There was a gap between the neighboring fences, and we quickly ran into it far enough down that you couldn't see us the best. We waited for 2 to 3 minutes to see if they followed. And sure enough, we saw that same car driving past with all the men looking around to see where we had gone. We froze, hoping to God or anyone really that they didn't see us. Hoping that if they did, we could outrun them, or at worst, hoping that our screams could alert either side of the neighbors we were hiding behind. And after about a minute, we booked it back to our house and ran back inside hoping that they somehow weren't waiting for us. She shuddered out of breath. This is why we can't walk alone. And I felt guilty and terrified. We peeked out our blinds for 5 to 10 minutes seeing if they would come back, and sure enough, they did, and they were still slowly searching for us. We thankfully didn't have any other issues after that, but now I'm happy that my mom was always too scared to let us out of her sight. Who knows what could have happened any other time if this happened to us after our 3rd or 5th outing alone. I recently read a story on Let's Not Meet that brought back old memories of my dad's crazy ex-girlfriend. This took place when I was around 8 to 9 years old, so I guess it would have been the year 1997. My parents had gotten divorced several years prior, so me and my little sister, 2 years younger, used to stay with our dad every other weekend. One day, he introduced us to his new girlfriend, Rachel, who was a tall blonde woman that had apparently won some kind of beauty pageant or something. I remember those first months of getting to know Rachel as fun. She seemed like a nice lady. I also think that my initial impression of her was helped by the fact that she had a rather cuddly gray parrot and a pet raven that could talk, which of course made my younger self quite ecstatic. But after a while, things started to change. I began to notice that she could be a bit odd at times, seeing weird things or acting a bit strangely. We started seeing her less frequently when we were staying with our dad. Then one day, he told us that they had broken up and that we wouldn't be seeing her anymore. He also told us that we shouldn't talk to her or go home with her if she showed up at school. Not long after that, Rachel really started harassing my dad. She would randomly turn up at places we went to visit during weekends. she would be trying to talk with us. She called him non-stop on the phone when we were at home, crying, making threats. It usually didn't stop until he pulled the plug. And years later, I found out that she had even threatened to kill me and my sister on several occasions, and that Dad got a restraining order. Rachel also keyed my dad's car, broke into his company to trash it, and stole a lot of money that he never got back. She even started writing threatening letters to my mom. My parents have always been good friends ever since the divorce, and it all culminated with a letter from the authorities. A letter accusing my dad of being a child molester. I still vividly remember how Mom sat us down in our room, holding the letter, a deep look of concern on her face, asking if Dad had ever touched us inappropriately. Which, of course, he never was. It later turned out that it was Rachel who had falsely accused him of such in an attempt to prevent him from seeing us. I remember feeling really angry and upset that she had gone to such lengths. The last memory that I have of Rachel was a few weeks before Christmas. We were staying at my dad's place over the weekend. It was a 2-story apartment complex with a large window spanning an entire wall, floor to ceiling, in the living room where we had just sat down to watch TV. Next to the window, there was a glass door leading onto a stone patio. It was bordering a lawn that ended with a tall hedge, and on this particular day, the outdoor lights had been switched off, which means it was pitch black outside as the intro to Superman started playing. A while into the episode, I suddenly heard a strange sharp noise coming from the window. It sounded like something was clawing on the glass in an attempt to get in. The sofa I was sitting on was placed right in front the window, so I had my back toward it when I slowly turned around to look over my shoulder, my heart thumping in my chest and my hairs standing on end as if I was being watched. But all that came into view was a pitch black darkness lurking behind my own reflection. And by this point, Dad had also heard the sound and had gotten up to turn on the patio lights. When the outside suddenly flooded with light, I found myself staring into the face of a smiling blonde woman peering into the living room. Need I tell you that I screamed? Both me and my sister flew up from the couch like it had been scorched with fire, and then we ran behind our dad. When I looked toward the window again, I saw Rachel with both of her hands up against the glass, tightly cupped beside her face as she was trying to look inside. The patio door was right next to her. I tugged on Dad's shirt and I whispered if the door was locked when she reached out toward the handle. That millisecond of doubt flashing across my dad's face still haunts me to this day. Rachel truly looked like a madwoman as she furiously jerked on the handle in an attempt to get in, briefly pausing to peer through the glass now and again. I remember thinking Dad looked oddly calm as he ushered us around a corner wall, telling us to stay out of sight. As he walked toward the patio door, we begged him not to go outside, thinking that maybe she could have a knife hidden somewhere. So he opened up a small crack with the door, firmly holding onto the handle, and asked what the hell she was doing in the backyard. She tried to get him to let her in, putting on a big smile, tossing her hair, but Dad obviously wouldn't budge, telling her to leave or that he would call the cops, to which she eventually conceded, leaving a bunch of Christmas presents behind. When Rachel was out of sight from the window, Dad went out to make sure that she was gone, picking up what she had left behind on his way back. None of us wanted anything to do with the presents. Something just really felt off about them, so they ended up still fully wrapped in the trash. My name is Adam, and I used to think that breakups, while hard, were something that you could eventually move on from. I dated a girl named Janine for about a year. We met at a mutual friend's party. She was charming, fun, and had this infectious energy that drew people to her. For a while, we were very happy together. But over time, things changed. Our differences became more apparent, and what started as minor disagreements grew into full-blown arguments. When we finally decided to call it quits, it felt like the right decision for the both of us. I thought that we would part ways amicably, each going forward with our own lives. But it didn't turn out that way. Well, not for Janine. It started with harmless texts, little messages checking in on me, asking how I was doing and what I was doing. I didn't think much of it at that time, just an ex trying to be friends. But then, the messages became more frequent and their tone shifted. She started bringing up moments from our past, reminiscing about the times that we had spent together. It was as if she was trying to pull me back into something that I already let go of. I responded politely at first, hoping to set some boundaries, but it only seemed to encourage her. Janine's attempts to stay connected quickly turned intrusive. She began calling late at night, leaving voicemails that sounded more desperate with each one. I would wake up to find a series of missed calls and increasingly emotional messages. It was unsettling, hearing her voice through the speaker, going over things that felt long resolved. I tried to distance myself, so I didn't reply to her much, so that it would also give her space to move on. But then, she started appearing at places that I frequented, seemingly by coincidence. I'd see her at the coffee shop near my work, at the gym, even at the pet store when I was getting some food for my buddy. At first, I thought that it was just bad timing. But then, it became clear that she was deliberately showing up where she knew that I would be. The final straw was when one night, while I was at home watching TV, I heard a knock on my door. I was about to open it, which is unfortunately a habit of mine, but something in my gut told me to check first. It was so weird. It was such a strong feeling. So I did. I looked through the peephole, and I saw my ex, but there were two men behind her. I did not like the sight of that. I asked her through the door what she wanted, and she said that she just wanted to talk. I told her to leave, but that's when they started banging and kicking on the door. My dog started barking like crazy. I dialed 911 on my phone, and I told them what was happening, while also running around the house, checking if the doors and windows were locked. And then, when I made sure that they were all locked, I took my dog and we went inside my bedroom and locked ourselves in there. To the credit of the police, they did arrive in less than 5 minutes. They probably had a unit around close to my house for some reason. My ex and her 2 male cousins were taken away, and I then explained to the officer what happened. A long story short, she won't be bothering me anytime soon. Stay safe, guys. Choose your partner wisely, because some people are crazy. At the time that this encounter occurred, I was a female and 19 years old, and I had just closed the store that I was working at with another coworker. They drove home, and since I lived just right across the street, I thought that I was safe to walk home alone. After all, it's just a 2-minute walk to my apartment. The apartment that I lived in had an auto shop below the building, which my uncle owned. And this is important info, trust me. It was around 9:30 at night, so it was pretty dark out, and the roads were empty. Not even 10 seconds after I walked across the street, A dark blue minivan pulls up beside me out of nowhere, and this kinda startled me, so I looked at the driver in confusion. I was carrying some bags of stuff that I bought from work, and the guy driving the van noticed and asked if I needed a ride. I kindly declined his offer and just told him that I lived a few minutes away, and so I started to continue walking. But the guy started slowly following me and continued. "Are you sure you don't need a ride? I mean, I don't mind." He asked again and again, and I continued to decline and I kept walking. But he was persistent, and this started to creep me out, so I started walking faster and I ignored him as he would repeatedly say things like, "Come on, get in my car. Come on, get in the car. Get in the car. Come on, get in." I was afraid to run inside the apartment because I really didn't want this creep to know where I lived, so I was going to just loop back around the building to lose him. Thankfully, I noticed that the auto shop's light were on and the garage door was open. My uncle must have been working late in the shop, so I sped walked towards the open garage, and the van sped off in a hurry as soon as they were about to pass by the open garage door. I told my uncle about what just happened and waited a few minutes before walking back out to get into my apartment. I locked all my doors and windows and I stayed in the living room until my dad came home from our cousin's house. And thankfully, I never saw that van again. I did finally buy some pepper spray after this incident. I usually always had my weighted pocket knife on me, but I had actually left it at home that day after using it to cut thick string for some crafts that I was working on. And to everyone, even if you only have to walk 2 minutes to get to your destination, even if you think you're safe, please treat it like it's a 20-minute walk home at night in a really sketchy town. Always be on high guard and continue with caution when going anywhere alone. If you at all don't feel safe walking alone and you have anyone like friends or family that you know you can trust that wouldn't mind giving you a ride or even tag along with you, don't be afraid to ask because it might just save your life. Hi everyone, my name is Chris, I'm female, and I'm 29, and I own a little flower shop nestled in the heart of town. It's a small business, but one that I have poured my heart into. Flowers have always fascinated me. Their colors, their scents, the way they can speak volumes without even uttering a word. Every day, I wake up early, excited to spend my hours surrounded by their beauty, arranging them into bouquets that brightens people's lives. Running a florist shop is not just about selling flowers. It's about being part of people's stories. I make arrangements for weddings, birthdays, and even those somber occasions like funerals. Each order carries its own significance, and I feel honored to be a part of those moments in some small way. I have a few regular customers who pop in throughout the week, but most days, I enjoy a steady flow of new faces, people who wander in off the street, drawn by the fresh blooms that line in the shop windows. It's really a peaceful job, one where I get to express creativity and share a bit of joy with the world. But today, I'm not writing solely to share about my job. I'm writing about an experience that I had that I considered somewhat scary, creepy, disturbing. I'm not quite sure what word is best to describe it, so I'm just gonna leave my story here and let you decide. A few months ago, a new customer started visiting the shop. At first glance, there was nothing unusual about him. He appeared polite and reserved. He was asking simple questions about the different types of flowers and also their meanings. I was more than happy to help. I was enjoying the chance to share my knowledge and passion. He came in regularly, more frequently than most, and in each visit, he bought a small gift. It could be a single cookie, a little smiley note, always different from the last. I thought nothing of it initially, since those were very simple gifts. I thought that he just appreciated the work that I do. Lots of people enjoy having fresh flowers at home, so maybe it was to thank me for that. But over time, I started noticing a pattern. He was always there, lingering in the shop, watching me closely as I worked. He began asking questions that felt too personal, wanting to know more about my life beyond the shop. I tried to keep the conversation light and professional, always steering it back to the flowers and their care. But his interest in me felt different, and it was starting to make me uneasy. One day, as I was closing up, I noticed him standing across the street. He didn't approach or wave, he just stood there watching as I locked the doors. It left a knot in my stomach, a feeling that I couldn't quite shake off. What the hell is he doing? I tried to wave at him, but he didn't wave back or say anything, so I just walked on and headed home. I convinced myself that it was harmless. Maybe he was just having a rough day. But then, he started showing up outside of the shop. And I would see him in grocery stores, the park where I took my morning walks, even at the cafe that I frequented on weekends. It was hard to dismiss as a coincidence when it happened so often, almost like he knew my schedule. The unease grew into something more when I received a letter in the mail. It wasn't like the usual orders or thank you notes that I sometimes get from the customers. This one was different. It was addressed directly to me with no return address. Inside, it was a single photo of me, one that looked like I didn't know that there was even a camera, and it was on a day where I wasn't in the shop. It also had confessions of love and admirations, and there was no sign of who sent it at the bottom. Reading it sent chills down my spine. It was clear that someone was watching me closely, and I couldn't help but connect the dots back to him. The thought of having an unwanted observer tracking my life was frightening. It made the world feel smaller, less safe. I became more cautious, and I was altering my routine slightly, trying to avoid being too predictable, and I started leaving the shop at different times, taking alternate routes going home, hoping to shake off the feeling of being followed. But everywhere I went, I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see him there. Despite the growing tension, I tried to maintain a sense of normalcy in the shop. My work was my refuge, a place where I could focus on beauty of the flowers and forget, if only for a moment, the creepy person or shadow or whatever that seemed to lurk in my life. But his presence was persistent. One evening after closing, I found a single flower left on the doorstep, a lily, my favorite. At first, I thought that it was just a kind gesture, but in context, and after everything that happened, it felt like something darker, a message meant only for me. Well, one night, everything was confirmed when he came into my shop again. I felt the chill, but I acted normal and professional, asking him with what I can help him with. And the words that came out of his mouth next was something that I kind of expected, but still gave me a shock and definitely frightened me. I can't remember it word for word, of course, but it was something along the lines of, "Why? Why are you not interested in me? Have I not been giving you enough attention? Am I not enough for you?" The way he said it wasn't sad. It was full of anger and desperation. I told him that I am not interested in being in any kind of relationship at all since I am busy working on my business and my dreams, and that I am sorry for not being able to return his feelings, but I'm just not interested. His expression became dark after I said those, and he looked like he was coming closer to me. So I told him that I will be willing to call the police if he doesn't leave me in my shop alone. That must have snapped him out of whatever he was thinking. And then he turned around, but before he left, he said, "This isn't over." I'm not gonna lie. I tried my best to act brave, but damn, was I scared out of my mind. I knew that I needed to take action, especially with the threat he left. I reached out to a friend who understood my situation. I explained everything that had happened. It was actually a relief to talk about it, to have someone validate my fears. Together, we decided that it was the best time to involve the authorities. I reached out to the authorities and I filed a report. They said that they couldn't do much without proof. But then I remembered that these things happened in my shop that had my security cameras. I gave them access to it, and they were able to trace back not only the latest interaction, but even the past multiple occurrences when he came to my shop. I was able to file a restraining order against him, and everything went back to normal. I apologize if there wasn't something in my story that seems very scary or dramatic, but to me, it was one of the scariest things that I have ever been through. So, to the man who stalked me in my own flower shop, let's not meet again. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate it. I would also like to give some extra love to my Patreon members, my channel members, and also my tippers. Thank you so much. If you would like to extend a little bit more support for the channel, don't forget to leave a like and a comment down below. If you would like to become a Patreon member, a channel member, a tipper, or even to buy merch, check out the links in the description below. Again, thank you. And I hope you stay scared, because your fear feeds me.